Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Karen von Hippel. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you here today. We're really looking forward to this event with the two, in my view anyway, the two most important ambassadors at NATO, U.S. Ambassador to NATO Kay Bailey Hutchison and a friend of RUSI, UK Ambassador Sarah McIntosh. So it's really a privilege to have them both here today. They're going to be talking about the upcoming NATO summit and a number of the challenges that will be on the agenda. And it's a pretty packed summit from what I can tell. Issues such as strengthening the transatlantic relationship, which also includes EU-NATO coordination, which is no easy feat. NATO's role in the counterterrorism mission in Iraq going forward after July, and the advise and assist role in really helping keep Iraq free of ISIL going forward, and that's a big mission as well. NATO's Black Sea presence, and then hybrid, cyber, and space. So lots of things on the agenda, all critical for NATO. And of course, I think there are other issues at NATO that many here will be interested in, which of course includes institutional reform. All multinationals need reform, and there are a number of issues at NATO that I know both ambassadors are very involved with: readiness, agility, capability, but also just making sure that the institution itself isn't overstretched. There's a big NATO commitment in Afghanistan. NATO's doing a lot on the migration challenge, and so there's really a lot on the plate right now. So we're really excited to hear from both of you, your thoughts on these critical issues. Just a bit about organization. Both remarks from both ambassadors will be fully on the record and on camera, and then the Q&A will be off the record and off camera, and those are RUSI rules, and we'd hope everyone here can respect that. So we want to have a frank Q&A discussion, and so please remember that that's fully off the record. So we have about 1.5 hours, so we'll have plenty of time, I think, for Q&A. As always, in the event of a fire, please follow RUSI staff to the nearest exits, and we will get you out of here. So just briefly, a little bit about each speaker, and then I'll invite them both to the podium to speak for about 10 or 15 minutes. Ambassador Sarah McIntosh, CMG, has been in position since January last year. She has a long and distinguished career in the Foreign Office, has served in Madrid, Vienna, New York. She was a High Commissioner in Sierra Leone, and many other places. Of course, critically, she's also on the RUSI Advisory Board, and that really matters to us. We're grateful for her support. Ambassador Kay Bailey Hutchison has been in her post since last summer, and she, prior to that, was a long and distinguished member of the U.S. Senate. She served for over 20 years, right? As a senator from Texas, and served on a number of defense and security committees in the Senate, which really has been, I'm sure, very helpful to this position, and those include the Armed Services Committee. She was also the chair of the Military Construction Subcommittee and the Defense Subcommittee on the Senate Appropriations Committee. And if you know anything about the Senate, you know that the most important committee is the Appropriations Committee. So, and prior to that, she has been a very prominent lawyer in Texas. So without further ado, let me first invite Ambassador McIntosh to speak, and then we'll have Ambassador Kay Bailey Hutchison. So please come over. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen. It's great to be back here. And before I start, I just want to say thank you to Ambassador Kay Bailey Hutchison for coming. It's a great privilege to have her here, and it's a great privilege to have her in the North Atlantic Council with all the experience that Karen has talked about. A year ago this week, before NATO's last summit, we met here to talk about NATO's adaptation to the more complex and contested world that's emerged since 2014, the period of profound change that we're living through, as the Prime Minister describes it. I described NATO's plans to adapt to the new Russia challenge and to new forms of warfare, and to increase its contribution to the global fight against terrorism. And I described a massive NATO adaptation programme on essentially 3 lines: military, political, and institutional. NATO's military adaptation is both to adapt where necessary, the conventional capabilities that NATO has always had, and to make them more usable than they already are in a data and hybrid age, and to respond to new technologies and their proliferation, such as cyber and ballistic missiles. NATO's political adaptation is essentially to respond to the consequences of globalization, From the nuclear and missile threats of DPRK to the risks of global terrorism and illegal migration at scale, more challenges now require collective defence and security and a NATO contribution, even where NATO is not the main actor. And institutional adaptation underpinning both of those military and political adaptations to ensure that NATO is able to take decisions at what Secretary Mattis calls the speed of relevance and is investing enough in defence and in the right sort of defence investment. In 100 days from now, NATO's leaders will meet for their 2018 summit. They will look at the progress that's been made on each of those lines and they'll set the trajectory for the future. So what will they see? What have we done in the last year? In 2017, we made really good progress on all three of those lines. Militarily, we deployed 4 combat-ready battle groups to NATO's enhanced forward presence in the Baltic states and Poland, a tripwire presence that went from concept to delivery in a year. We built rapid response forces able to deploy within days if needed in support of that tripwire. We tripled the size of the NATO response forces able to back those rapid response forces. We extended air policing and we strengthened NATO's presence in the Black Sea. We sent 3,000 more forces to Afghanistan. We opened a new hub for the South in Naples. We created a framework for the South to give focus to our projecting stability work into our southern neighbourhood. We exercised our response to a hybrid attack and we created a new strategic framework for communications and for deterrence communications. We agreed that allies' cyber capabilities could be integrated into NATO operations, and the UK became the first ally to offer her offensive cyber capability to NATO. Politically, we welcomed a 29th ally in Montenegro. We created a new framework for managing NATO's overall posture. We agreed a new NATO counter-terrorism action plan, and we joined the global coalition against ISIL. We started capacity building work in Iraq. And institutionally, we reformed NATO's intelligence and information structures. We created new analysis capacities for terrorism and for hybrid threats. We started work on reforming NATO's command structure, and defence investment increased by $29 billion. By any measure, that's a lot of change, particularly in an international organisation, and it's been done at rapid pace. But the security situation has continued to evolve, and now we have further to go. Most sadly, we need to recognise and ensure that we are able to respond to further challenges from Russia. For almost 70 years, NATO has pursued a single purpose, peace. And for the first 40 years of that, it was by deterring the Soviet Union and by being ready to defend against attack from the Soviet Union if necessary. And then for 25 years after the end of the Cold War, when that deterrence and defence role somehow seemed less necessary, NATO operated out of area. We used to say you have to go out of area or go out of business, NATO, because that challenge is gone. It worked on crisis management and supporting stability in our immediate neighbourhood, and we sought partnership with Russia, the states of the Warsaw Pact, former Warsaw Pact, and more widely. And in most cases, reaching out had exactly the intended effect, which is to say we were able to help create the conditions for a free choice of future destiny. Some states chose not to join us, and that was fine. Some states chose not to join but to become partners, and that was fine too. Others chose to join us and have brought valuable and valued new allies into the alliance. And for many years, reaching out to Russia herself worked well, with dialogue through the NATO-Russia Council, for instance. But today the relationship with Russia is more strained than any of us had hoped. Here at RUSI, you are familiar with the list of unwelcome and in many cases illegal Russian actions, from the illegal invasion and annexation of Crimea to fomenting conflict in the Donbass, from Flight MH17 to the Montenegro coup attempt, from violations of the INF and other arms control agreements to repeated violations of European airspace, from using radiological substances to murder Alexander Litvinenko on British soil to cyber attacks on the Bundestag, the Dutch referendum, the Bulgarian government and the Democratic National Congress. All of this we have known, and we have hardened our resiliences and defences against. But since we last spoke, Russia's leadership has gone further. President Putin has threatened, through his State of the Union address, new weapons systems, including new nuclear-powered missiles, nuclear-powered underwater drones, hypersonic missiles, able to fly, he said, like a ball of fire. Russian leadership has sought to weaponize information, using state-run media organizations to plant fake stories and photoshopped images in an attempt to sow discord in the West and to undermine our institutions and our belief in them. Today we have to point to Syria. As in Syria, we've seen Russia impeding the OPCW's work and supporting a member state to use chemical weapons against its own people, blocking meetings of the Security Council and failing to use any influence with the Syrian regime over air attacks, humanitarian access, or measures to bring an end to the terrible suffering of the Syrian people. And then a month ago, the first use of a nerve agent on NATO territory since the alliance's foundation, with the attack on Sergei Skripal and its reckless consequences for bystanders and the public. NATO's immediate response to that act, like our national response, has been to self-protect. In NATO's case, by withdrawing the accreditation of 7 undeclared intelligence officials and withholding accreditation for 3 more en route to the headquarters. And in so doing, NATO has acted with 27 leading states to self-protect from Russian actors who were not there for the purposes of diplomacy and engagement, or for dialogue and understanding, but for espionage, sometimes crime, and sometimes to damage their hosts, not engage with them. These withdrawals were not steps that we in the UK or that allies wanted to take. For most allies, as for us here, there is nothing inevitable about a contested future with Russia. We in the UK will continue to say clearly and honestly that we have no quarrel with the Russian people, that we remain open to a constructive relationship with Russia if she chooses that path. And in NATO, the same. While there can be no return to business as usual, we will maintain our twin-track approach of strong deterrence and defence and the offer of dialogue through the NATO-Russia Council. We will continue to offer NATO-Russia Councils as a forum for dialogue and as a route to risk reduction and transparency, since its creation. And we will continue to hope that Russia will respond constructively. But at the same time, we must continue to recognise and adapt to the challenges from Russia, and the summit will do that. It will also direct NATO to further adapt to the other challenges of the international security environment, including the growing threat from terrorism and instability, wider state competition and erosion of the rules-based international order, and threats, especially cyber threats, from rapid technology change. These challenges face all allies, individually and collectively. Our national response has been set out in our National Security Capabilities Review published last week. We in the UK have always understood that our security is bound to global security, and we invest in global security knowing that this is how we best protect ourselves and our people at home and abroad. That's why we're the second largest defence spender in NATO, the only EU member to spend 2% on defence and 0.7% on international aid, and why we'll continue to meet these commitments. It's why we've created a highly developed set of security and defence relationships and invested in critical capabilities. And it's why we're a leading contributor to international missions, including the NATO missions in Eastern Europe. And it's why we want to continue to cooperate with our EU partners as we leave the Union. But now, through the NSCR, we will need to go further. Now we will further strengthen and modernise defence and our armed forces, and extend our overseas network and our national security communications and deterrence communications. We will further harden our defences and increase the assurance of resilience against threats and attacks of all types. We will address the root causes of vulnerability to exploitation, and we will use technology to keep us safe and impede its use by those, like terrorists, who would use it to harm us. And we will use our new fusion doctrine to bring together all the levers of national power, to identify the most effective, efficient combination of ways to achieve the government's objectives over the long term, choosing the best approach for each situation, sometimes weighted towards particular capabilities, sometimes asymmetric to the threat, drawing on all the sources of information and data from within government and outside, and looking to capabilities outside the traditional national security departments in the private and third sectors. And finally, we will modernise our deterrence, aiming to deter completely catastrophic threats, as we always have, and to raise the cost of seeking to attack us below the threshold for a military response. And in NATO this year, in 2018, we will work with our allies and through the summit to ensure that our enhanced forward presence forces are enabled across all domains and can call on greater reinforcements than we've already put in place, that our mechanisms for early warning are strong and integrated, and we will wait to maintain assurance of our national and collective resilience against threats of all types and hybrid attacks. We will agree a new NATO command structure, which will include a new Joint Force Command for the North Atlantic, a new support command focused on logistics reinforcement and military mobility within Europe, an additional land component commands in Europe, and a new cyber operations centre. We will have a NATO command structure able to respond to any threat from any direction at any time. And we will also work on new logistical and other arrangements for military mobility within and across Europe, the ability to move forces quickly if we need to, and mechanisms for integrating allies' offensive cyber capabilities into NATO operations. We'll build our regional links and engagement with regional organisations. We will further increase support to the Balkans, the Western Balkans, and we will increase our defence capacity building to support our neighbours and partners with a new mission in Iraq. We will use all the tools at our disposal and seek to work with other organisations that have tools that we need to keep us and our allies safe, in particular the EU. NATO-EU cooperation is essential in a hybrid 360 world. To deter and defend against a full range of threats, we need to use the full spectrum of our tools, from military, political engagement to development assistance, from capacity building to rule of law support, from defence engagement to reinforced deterrence. NATO and the EU have an extensive menu of cooperative activities, including cooperation to counter cyber threats, counter hybrid threats, and on maritime security. We supported that work before the referendum, and we support it now. And you'll see more NATO and EU cooperation in the future. Two final points before I stop. First, on defence investment. This will rightly be discussed at the summit extensively and in the run-up to it. So what are the facts? The facts are these. Allied defence investment has increased significantly, but there is further to go. In 2014, Allies decided to stop the decline in defence investment. In 2015, they stopped the decline. In 2016, defence investment started to rise. And over the last 3 years, it has increased by $46 billion US. By the end of this year, 8 allies will meet their 2% defence investment pledge, and by 2024, 15 allies, a majority, is expected to meet that 2% pledge. And that's all good. But there is further to go, because there are 14 allies that don't yet have a plan for that. We are proud to be one of the 8 allies meeting 2%, and one of the 6 that meets both 2% and 20% on new equipment, and to be the only ally that meets the 2% target, the 20% target, and the 0.7% target. And we welcome that almost all allies are investing more in defence, but we want to see more, and we'll continue to press more for all to meet the pledge they made at Wales. And finally, and I want to be very precise about this and to say it on the record, because many things will be said this week, and some of them quite bad-tempered. NATO has spent 70 years on a single purpose, and that is peace. And NATO threatens no one. But NATO will do what it takes to deter threats and defend allies if necessary. It's the bedrock of our security, and for the UK it's the heart of our defence, and it will remain so. So that's what we're doing. NATO is the most successful military alliance in the world because it adapts when the world changes, and the world's changing again, growing more tense, more complex. And so NATO's adapting again, quickly, radically, profoundly. As we have in the past, we are doing again. We're reinforcing again the deterrence and defence, staying open to dialogue. We're developing further projecting stability and increasing the contribution to the global fight against terrorism. We're adapting NATO and ourselves, our allies, to the realities of modern conflict, to hybrid threats and life in the cyber and data age. And we're adapting ourselves to the speed and the investment needed to stay secure and defended today. And we are, Kay and I and our colleagues, as they say, on it.
Thank you. Please, thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Karen, for hosting and inviting me to come. And I want to say how much I enjoy working with my colleague, Sarah MacIntosh. She's doing a wonderful job. But I also want to say that there is the most special relationship long-term between the U.S. and the UK. If there is one ally that we will always know is there, it is the UK, and I hope UK feels the same. And this is very important because we are in an era in which we need allies. Some have said, well, is the U.S. walking away from alliances, from NATO? But I will say this about our president. He has come all the way around from campaign talk to what is important for the United States in a military alliance, and he is firmly behind NATO and the importance of this alliance. It's important because we could speak alone. We could go out and do everything we've talked about alone. We have the capability to do it, and we have the will to do it. But are we as effective in doing it alone? No, we're absolutely not. We are effective because we are speaking from an alliance of 29. And as difficult sometimes as I think your own Winston Churchill once said, working within an alliance. The only thing harder is working without one. And I believe now more than ever that it is so important that we are representing really a values system, a system of doing things the right way and affecting human rights, affecting a way of life, affecting freedom, affecting what we all cherish in the way we have been able to live. And we are now the representation of that. There are no strong countries that are like us. The other strong adversaries that we face are not democracies. We must know that democracies have to stick together for the strength to keep our way of life intact. And that's what NATO is doing. And I am the newcomer at NATO for sure. I came in the summer, but I am impressed with a different NATO than I worked with in the United States Senate for 20 years. We did think at one time, it's hard to remember, but we thought maybe Russia would become a partner and even a member of NATO, as Germany did. Germany did all of the right things and then became a member of NATO. We hoped that would be the case with Russia, but Russia has gone in the opposite direction. And it is now so much a time that we must show Russia that it is our democracies and our way of life that we are going to protect, that we have the will to protect, and that we will protect at all costs. Russia needs to know that. We started that message, we started that message a long time ago, but most recently, right here in the UK. It was a groundswell of support by the allies of UK to speak out and say, Russia, you have crossed the line. Using nerve agents in one of our countries against a citizen of our country is out across the line. It hasn't been crossed before, and we're not going to stand for it to be crossed ever again. And the strength, I will give your Prime Minister, Theresa May, and your Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Johnson, great credit for rallying the alliance and saying, this is for all of us, that we stand firm. And the alliance has come through. NATO came through, as Sarah mentioned. We expelled 1/3 of the delegation from Russia. And we also made it permanent. So they will have a permanent presence of 20 instead of 30 because we took that extra step. That was in alliance and in solidarity with the UK. And we thank you for standing up and for asking allies to stand up, and we were right there with you. So now we have the bigger picture of Russia. I think Sarah has so well documented where NATO has been and where we are going. But I think our new challenge has really evolved since the dreadful attack in UK and now in Syria. We are seeing that Russia is getting more and more menacing, and in different ways. And I think that that is going to dominate the summit that is coming up this summer. Maybe 8 weeks ago, I wouldn't have said that Russia would be the dominance as it is going to be surely going forward. Russia has been menacing. They have been doing many things that are outside the norms of what we would expect in global responsibility. But now they are ratcheting up the heat. They are probing. They are pushing the envelope in so many areas to see if our Western resolve is there, to see if we are going to have the commitment. Are we going to stand in the face of their transgressions in our democracies, on missile defense systems, on even keeping their word on the UN sanctions against DPRK, what they're doing in Afghanistan. on and on and on. They are violating the norms that we would expect from a great country. And now we're going to have to tell them very firmly that we are also going to go out on all fronts and say, no, you are going too far. We would welcome Russia to be a nation with whom we could trade, a nation with whom we could work militarily. We have tried to do that in Syria on a bilateral basis. We've tried to say, okay, we will have no infringement zones, no encroachment zones. But time and time again, we get surprised. So we've got to play the hand that has been dealt. And it's going to be a hard hand to win, but there is no alternative to winning. So Russia will be a major part of our summit that is coming up. We have put forward an enhanced forward presence in 4 countries in Europe that are members of NATO. After the Crimea overtaking that Russia did, we decided it was time to firm up the areas that would be most likely encroached on by Russia. So UK is the lead in the framework nation in Estonia. We are the framework leader in Poland. We have 2 partners also leading in Latvia and Lithuania. So those are where we are, but we need to expand that into the whole Black Sea region. There is no doubt that the proximity of the Black Sea to the other countries of NATO must be protected. So we are going to move forward on that front, gradually going up to the summit, but we believe that there will be more of an emphasis on Black Sea deterrence. Most certainly we're going to have to firm up the forward presence that Sarah mentioned that we put forward in pretty much lightning speed for NATO, I would say. When Crimea happened in 2014, we discussed it very quickly, and then in 2015 had a plan, and we do have a strong forward presence now, at least 1,000 troops in each of those countries, and now the beginnings of capabilities to get into any country that might be encroached on by Russia. But we're not nearly where we need to be. As Sarah also mentioned, we need to shore up the enhanced forward presence with mobility. That's where we hope the EU will be helpful. They can help us get through the EU countries on a more expedited basis if we're in a crisis. We don't have that capability right now, but we are looking to our partners in the EU to help make that happen. It is essential if we are going to have true deterrence. Burden sharing will most certainly be a part of the summit. And I want to say that burden sharing is also essential. And we talk about 2% and 20% capabilities. We talk about that a lot, and everyone understands 2%, 20%. But the 2% is not just a figure that was drawn out of the air. It is the essential spending that we must make on the essential capabilities that we must have. We have to have more airplanes, more tanks, more technology, more capability than we have today. And the number is 2% of our joint gross domestic product. Thank you, UK, for being the other big country that does have the 2% requirement and makes the goal. Of course, America is also there. But we need all of our allies to do this if we are going to have the capacity. And you can't say, yes, we are going to spend 2% and then be able to spend it tomorrow. You have to say, here is our plan for 2%. And in order to get those F-35 fighters or those fighters that are made right here in the UK, you've got to be able to order them and then have time for them to be made and make the payments. So you can't do 2% overnight. You have to plan to do it all along the way to increase up to 2%. And that is going to be essential if we're going to have the interoperable fighters, the interoperable tanks, the interoperable technology and burden and intelligence sharing that we must have, which includes, of course, the burden sharing that we also must have. So I hope that we will make more progress than we have made, although we are going in the right direction. $46 billion since 2017 has been the increase of non-U.S. allies. So if you put what U.S. has put in, it's a significant increase. We do pay the most, of course. But we want more burden sharing because we want to speak as a true alliance. An American-led alliance, but not an America-alone alliance. It has to be a true alliance. UK is doing its part. We need every ally to do its part for us to be a true and effective alliance. Afghanistan is a very important part of our mission. And again, UK is very helpful in Afghanistan. We are asking all of our partners to do more in Afghanistan. I was there just probably 3 to 4 weeks ago, and we have a president now in Ghani who is absolutely committed to what will make a lasting peace in Afghanistan. Not only is he putting forward with his rival, Abdullah, who is the number 2 in government. They have an allied government. Ghani defeated Abdullah in the election, and they are now working together. I'm not saying they're pals, but I'm saying they are working together, and the big things that are being done with them together on board, saying this is what we need to do. And Afghanistan is important. Let me just give you one statistic. The second largest number of refugees in Europe today are Afghans. Syria is first, Afghanistan is second. We need to be able to build Afghanistan into a country that can defend itself. Today, Afghanistan is defending itself. It is the Afghan troops that are on the ground. It is our troops of NATO that are helping them with advice, helping them with training, but we are not doing the heavy fighting anymore. They are doing it, and they're doing a good job. Everywhere we went to the 4 framework divisions, they all said, the Italians, the Turks, the Germans, and the Americans say, the Afghans are good fighters. They're doing the job, and they're taking the casualties. We need to be there for them to continue shoring them up. The U.S. has started again to do the overflights that give cover to the Afghan troops as they are going out to defeat the Taliban efforts to increase the drug trade and put terrorism in the people of Afghanistan. So we're doing our part, but we need to stay the course. The new mission that America adopted has been universally acclaimed, that we are going to have not a time-based strategy, but a conditions-based strategy for Afghanistan. We are not going to set a deadline and say we're leaving Afghanistan, as has been done before. We are going to say there have to be conditions on the ground that would be a lasting capability for good governance and peace before we leave. We must all be committed to that, because if we're not, Afghanistan will retreat once again into a terrorist haven. We cannot allow that to happen because those terrorists are exported to our countries. Afghanistan is where the 9/11 attack was planned. So we know that that can happen, and we don't want it to happen again or to any other country in our alliance. So we must keep that commitment. In return, the Afghans must have a commitment to reform, to have a commitment to begin to take over their own capabilities for defense. And they are doing that. They have gone so far as to say to the Taliban, come to the table without condition. Put down your arms, stop the violence, and come to the table if you are a true Afghan. That is the most that anyone could ever offer, considering the atrocities that the Taliban has put on the people of Afghanistan. But President Ghani is doing it, and there is a beginning of the atmosphere changing in Afghanistan as we speak. And that has come back from all of our military leaders. But let me say one thing about what every military leader has said as we have visited them in their division headquarters. We're not just fighting local tribal terrorists. It's not that easy. The reason this is so hard is because there are enablers that have capacity. And the enablers mentioned by our military leaders are Iran, Pakistan, and Russia. And if we are fighting people with those capabilities, our resolve must be firm, and it is going to be very, very important. We have to bring Pakistan back over into our arena so that they can be the ally that they have been in the past and can be again. But they can no longer harbor the terrorist leaders, the Haqqani network, and the Taliban in Pakistan and give them safe harbor. They can't do it and continue to be an ally with America and with NATO. So we are trying to encourage that with them. So I don't want to go too far over time because I know you have many questions, and I didn't want to repeat what Sarah said, but let me just end by saying this. NATO must be strong and united. They cannot be just strong or just united. A strong message by a vote of 15 to 14 is not going to work. A unified message that is weak is not going to work. We are facing a huge threat for all of our NATO countries, and we must meet that threat with strength and unity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.